ช่างน่าประหลาดใจผู้ชายคนหนึ่งที่เป็นโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมที่ต้องนั่งรถเข็นมา2 ปีสามารถปั่นจักรยานรอบหมู่บ้านได้ร่างกายยืดหยุ่นอาการปวดกระดูกสันหลังหายไปหมดแล้วแขนขาไม่ชาหรือขั้นอีกต่อไปเขาไม่ส่งเสียงกระรุ้งกริ้งแล้วข้อต่อเริ่มนุ่มและยืดหยุ่นมากขึ้นราวกับว่าเขาไม่เคยเป็นโรคกระดูกและข้อมาก่อนเขาปวดเมื่อยทั้งตัวทุกวันในหลายปีที่ผ่านมาปวดเมื่อยทั้งข้อเข่าและเท้าแขนขามีอาการชาตลอดเวลาข้อเข่าบวมต้องทานยารักษากระดูกเสื่อมหลายชนิดทำให้เขาต้องไปหาหมอที่มีชื่อเสียงทั่วประเทศไทยหลายครั้งแล้วแต่ไม่ดีขึ้นบังเอิญเขาได้เพื่อนแนะนำเม็ดฟูเขาซื้อ5 หลอดมาใช้ทันทีวันละ2 เม็ดดีมากเลยเพราะว่าภายใน7 วันเขาก็รู้สึกว่าอาการปวดเมื่อยลดลงรู้สึกสบายมากขึ้น
เราเข้าใจคุณดีนะครับว่าอาการปวดข้อเข่าเสื่อมเนี่ยมันทรมานแค่ไหนจะขยับตัวจะเดินแต่ละครั้งเนี่ยมันก็ไม่สะดวกเสียงกระดูกนี่ดังกรับปวดบั้นท้ายปวดข้อปวดเข่าคุณภาพชีวิตก็แย่ลงครับผมกล้าท้าให้คุณเอาไปลองได้เลยแค่7 วันก็กลับมาเดินได้ถ้าคุณอยากหายผมจะมาบอกว่าต้องทำอย่างไรสามารถมั่นใจได้เลยนะครับว่าผลิตภัณฑ์นี้ดีจริงๆเพราะว่าลูกค้าหมื่นรายเนี่ยกลับมาซื้อซ้ำการที่ทานเป็นประจำทุกวันเนี่ยทำให้ชีวิตของเขาดีขึ้นจริงๆเขาอยากจะไปไหนเขาก็ได้ไปเขาอยากจะทำกิจกรรมอะไรเขาก็ได้ทำไม่กลับมาเป็นภาระของลูกหลานต่อ
โรคข้ออักเสบโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมทำให้เกิดอาการตรึงและปวดในหัวเข่าไหล่หลังกระดูกสันหลังแขนขาหากไม่รักษาโรคก็ค่อยๆแย่ลงทำให้เป็นอัมพาตและพิการเม็ดฟูโบคาเมจากสหพันธ์สาธารณรัฐเยอรมนีพร้อมสารออกฤทธิ์แฮปโปไซส์เพื่อช่วยบรรเทาอาการปวดสร้างใหม่และบำรุงกระดูกอ่อนข้อโดยปกป้องเยื่อหุ้มไขข้อเพิ่มความแข็งแรงและความยืดหยุ่นของข้อต่อชะลอความเสื่อมและปกป้องข้อต่อช่วยให้คุณเคลื่อนไหวได้อย่างคล่องตัวและควบคุมชีวิตของคุณเม็ดฟูโบก็ช่วยบรรเทาอาการปวดสร้างกระดูกอ่อนข้อปกป้องกระดูกและข้อ
เนื่องจากผมใช้ผลิตภัณฑ์เม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคากระดูกและข้อของผมเนี่ยกลับมาดีขึ้นเลยครับผมชีวิตก็กลับมาดีขึ้นเช่นกันรู้สึกสดชื่นสุขภาพแข็งแรงกินได้นอนหลับครับโบคาเนี่ยสุดยอดจริงๆครับผมต้องขอบคุณโบคาครับที่ทำให้ผมเนี่ยกลับมาใช้ชีวิตได้ตามปกติอีกครั้งครับมีสินค้าดีๆแบบนี้ผมก็อยากจะแนะนำให้กับคนที่มีอาการแบบเดียวกับผมนะครับได้รู้จักกันมากๆครับผมเพราะว่าการเจ็บปวดจากโรคอาการแบบนี้เป็นระยะเวลานานๆเนี่ยมันจะส่งผลกระทบต่อชีวิตและจิตใจอย่างมากเลยครับหวังว่าเม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคาจะนำผลดีมาสู่คนที่มีอาการข้อเข่าเสื่อมเช่นผมนะครับเม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคาคือที่1
ถึง 3 เดือนแรกมันก็ค่อยๆดีขึ้นนะคะอาการปวดมันก็น้อยลงเข่ามันก็ไม่ดังก๊อบแก๊บก็เริ่มเดินดีขึ้นแม่เดินไม่โยกไม่เยกพอทานมาเรื่อยๆประมาณ 6-7 เดือนเนี่ยค่ะมันก็ค่อยๆหายไปความตึงก็ไม่มีค่ะก็เดินดีขึ้นแม่ขายของได้ทุกวันยืนตั้งแต่เช้าจนเย็นแม่ก็ยืนได้ไม่ปวดเข่าเลยค่ะ
เหมือนปาฏิหาริย์จริงๆเรื่องจริงเลยอันนี้ไม่ได้โกหกไม่ได้อะไรมาสอบถามคนแถวนี้ได้เลยนะเหมือนคนปกติอะค่ะขึ้นเขาได้ไหว้พระได้ขึ้นเขาผาซ่อนแก้ววัดพระธาตุผาซ่อนแก้วลูกตกใจขึ้นถึงสุดเลยขึ้นไปข้างบนสุดเลยไปถ่ายรูปไปอะไรต่ออะไรลูกยังบอกไม่น่าเชื่อเลยนะแม่ไม่น่าเชื่อว่าแม่จะดีขึ้นขนาดนี้ใครที่เป็นข้อเข่าเสื่อมนะคะทานเลยนะคะเพราะว่าขนาดดิฉันนะคะเป็นทั้งข้อเข่าเสื่อมแล้วก็รุมาตอยนะคะลองเลยค่ะไม่ต้องเสียดายตังค์นะคะคุ้มค่าที่สุดเลยค่ะสุขภาพเราดีที่สุดแล้วทานแล้วสุขภาพเราดีเนี่ยโอเค
เหลือเพียง50 ชุดเท่านั้นค่ะกับส่วนลด 50% สำหรับเม็ดฟูโบเคอร์รีบโทรมาที่หมายเลขโทรศัพท์ที่อยู่บนหน้าจอเลยค่ะเพื่อรับข้อเสนอซื้อ3แถม1ซื้อ4แถม2ซื้อ6แถม3
ตอนนี้มีเม็ดฟูโบคาผลิตภัณฑ์พิเศษที่ช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยหายปวดได้เร็วไม่กลับมาเป็นซ้ำและไม่ต้องผ่าตัดอีกด้วยสินค้าได้รับความไว้วางใจจากคนไทยหลายพันคน
เม็ดฟูโบก็เป็นส่วนผสมของสารออกฤทธิ์แฮปโปไซด์และเทคโนโลยีเอนไซม์ค้นคิดโดยนักวิทยาศาสตร์ซึ่งเป็นความหวังอันยิ่งใหญ่ของผู้ที่เป็นโรคข้อกระดูกเสื่อมการวิจัยที่ก้าวล้ำนี้ไม่เพียงแต่มีประสิทธิภาพสูงในการลดอาการปวดลดการอักเสบส่งเสริมการสร้างกระดูกและฟื้นฟูกระดูกอ่อนข้อเท่านั้นแต่ยังช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยคล่องแคล่วเคลื่อนอย่างรวดเร็วเมื่อเคลื่อนไหวและป้องกันการแข็งตัวได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพ
คู่นะครับเป็นเวลา1 สัปดาห์ผมรู้สึกว่า อาการมันดีขึ้นนะครับ รู้สึกตรงที่เจ็บมันเบาลงมาก ตอนนี้ข้อต่อของแขน ขาเคลื่อนไหวได้ตามปกติดีขึ้นกว่าเดิม กระดูกสันหลังก็เจ็บปวดน้อยลง เคลื่อนไหวดีไม่เหมือนเมื่อก่อนเลยครับ
ไปได้ 10-12 วันอาการปวดเนี่ยมันก็เริ่มหายเดินทางง่ายขึ้นที่สำคัญเราเนี่ยทำงานง่ายขึ้นแล้วก็เร็วขึ้น แล้วก็ไม่ต้องทนทรมาน
หลังจากที่ผมได้ลองใช้เม็ดฟูโบกาแค่5 วันเนี่ยอาการปวดหลังเนี่ยมันลดลงจริงๆครับกลางคืนเนี่ยนอนหลับสบายมากขึ้นไม่ต้องตื่นกลางดึกเหมือนแต่ก่อนแถมยังไม่มีอาการปวดหลังเลยทั้งนี้
ข่าวดีสำหรับผู้ป่วยเป็นโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมเป็นครั้งแรกที่นักวิทยาศาสตร์เยอรมนีประสบความสำเร็จในการใช้ฮาปาโกไซด์สารออกฤทธิ์ที่พบในต้นโครงเล็บปีศาจเพื่อบรรเทาอาการปวดได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพหลังใช้เพียง 5-7 วันป้องกันการเสื่อมสภาพและช่วยให้กระดูกแข็งแรงประสิทธิภาพที่ได้รับการพิสูจน์จากทางสถาบัน RKI ประเทศเยอรมนีช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยลดอาการปวดเคลื่อนไหวได้ง่ายขึ้นและที่สำคัญไม่ต้องผ่าตัดค่ะ
เวลาไปไหนมาไหนเนี่ยจะรู้สึกว่าเราก้าวขาได้ไม่ค่อยดีนะคะไปพบคุณหมอค่ะคุณหมอก็ให้ยามารับประทานนะคะแต่ว่าไม่ดีขึ้นนะคะจนกระทั่งดิฉันได้มาพบดร.เดชานะคะดร.เดชาเนี่ยเป็นผู้ชำนาญเกี่ยวกับการรักษาข้อเข่านะคะแนะนำให้ดิฉันรู้จักโบคาค่ะเป็นเม็ดฟูที่ช่วยรักษาเกี่ยวกับอาการปวดข้อเข่าโดยเฉพาะค่ะดิฉันรับประทานมาแล้ว3 หลอดนะคะบอกได้เลยว่าดีมากค่ะอาการปวดข้อเข่าต่างๆเนี่ยหายไปนะคะเรียกว่าใช้ชีวิตประจำวันได้กลับมาเหมือนปกติเลยเวลาขึ้นลงบันไดเนี่ยสบายมากนะคะเวลาก้มเวลาเงยหรือว่ายืดตัวย่อตัวพวกนี้สบายมากเหมือนสมัยสาวๆเลยค่ะใช้แล้วเนี่ยดีมากเลยรู้สึกว่าอยากจะบอกต่อนะคะโบคานะคะเป็นเม็ดฟูที่ช่วยเสริมสร้างเนื้อเยื่อกระดูกอ่อนแล้วก็ฟื้นฟูเนื้อเยื่อข้อเข่านะคะใช้แล้วเนี่ยจะรู้ว่าเห็นผลค่ะเพราะว่าอาการปวดแป๊บเจ็บแป๊บเวลายืดเวลาเหยียดเวลาก้าวขึ้นลงบันไดพวกนี้ดีขึ้นมากเลยค่ะสำหรับคนที่มีปัญหานะคะอย่าเก็บไว้ค่ะอย่าทนทรมานนะคะแนะนำโบคาเลยค่ะเพราะว่าใช้แล้วดีจริงๆนะคะใช้แล้วเห็นผลค่ะขอบคุณมากค่ะ
ผู้ชมทุกคนคะในการสั่งซื้อเม็ดฟูโบกาของแท้โปรดติดต่อหมายเลขสายด่วนด้านบนหน้าจอเราพร้อมเสมอที่จะช่วยและซัพพอร์ตทุกคนนะคะ
หลังจากที่ทานเม็ดฟูได้10 กว่าวันนะคะตอนนี้ก็ไม่มีอาการปวดแล้วนะคะเข่าทั้ง2 ข้างอันนี้ก็แบบยืดได้สบายๆไม่มีรอยแดงบวมเลยนะคะได้รู้จักตัวเม็ดโบกาเร็วกว่านี้นะคะอาการก็คงจะไม่แย่ขนาดนี้นะคะแต่ว่าตอนนี้รู้จักแล้วก็รู้สึกดีๆรู้สึกดีมากเลยค่ะ
เมื่อก่อนผมรู้สึกผมชอบมันมากผมก็เลยซื้อมาตอนแรก3 หลอดเป็นเม็ดฟูละลายน้ำค่ะผมไม่คิดเลยว่าผลิตภัณฑ์โบกาธรรมดาขวดนี้จะออกฤทธิ์และให้ผลที่รวดเร็วมากผมทำไปประมาณ3 สัปดาห์ผมรู้สึกว่าอาการปวดเข่าปวดข้อเนี่ยมันค่อยๆหายไปต้องขอบคุณโบกามากครับที่ทำให้ผมและครอบครัวได้กลับมามีความสุข
โบคานี่ดีจริงๆเลยค่ะถูกใจมากๆเลยไปลองกันนะคะทุกคน
ดิฉันได้ทำตามคำแนะนำของคุณหมอดื่มวันละ2 เม็ดเช้าเย็นหลังอาหารนะคะไม่น่าเชื่อเลยนะคะผ่านไป3 เดือนแล้วเนี่ยอาการต่างๆนะคะที่เคยปวดข้อปวดเข่าอะไรต่างๆดีขึ้นมากเลยค่ะหายไปเลยไม่รู้สึกปวดเลยเดี๋ยวนี้เดินไปตลาดไปซื้อของเพื่อเอามาทำอาหารที่บ้านเองหรือเดินไปปากซอยสบายมากเลยค่ะไม่รู้สึกอาการปวดอะไรเลยเดินไกลๆได้ดีเลยเพราะว่าโบกาเม็ดฟูนี่เองค่ะ
เพียงแค่1 เม็ดใส่แก้วละลายน้ำและดื่มหลังอาหาร20 นาทีวันละ2 เม็ดจะช่วยขจัดอาการต่างๆเช่นปวดเข่าปวดหลังปวดกระดูกสันหลังชาที่แขนขาผู้ป่วยหลังจากใช้โบคาทุกคนพึงพอใจมากสามารถเดินขึ้นลงบันไดเดินไปตลาดหรือทำงานบ้านได้ตอนนี้ชีวิตของพวกเขาเปลี่ยนไปอย่างสิ้นเชิงหลังจากใช้ผลิตภัณฑ์เพียง 2-3 เดือนมีลูกค้ามากกว่า 500,000 คน เคยใช้และพึงพอใจมากกับเม็ดฟูโบคาคุณสามารถโทรติดต่อสายด่วนเพื่อทราบข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมเกี่ยวกับโปรโมชั่นเพื่อรับคำปรึกษาฟรีจากผู้เชี่ยวชาญ
กระดูกและข้อของเราก็เหมือนมอเตอร์ไซค์และรถยนต์นะคะ หากเราใช้ไป 10 ถึง 15 ปีโดยไม่รับการดูแลเอาใจใส่ มันก็จะพังและต้องทิ้งไปค่ะ แต่ถ้าเรามีวินัยต้องดูแลหลังจากใช้งานแต่ละครั้ง พวกเขาจะได้ทำความสะอาดบำรุงรักษาทาน้ำมันและจาระบีอย่างสม่ำเสมอมันจะอยู่กับเราได้หลายปีนะคะร่างกายของเราก็เหมือนรถยนต์คันนั้นวัยชราก็จะแก่เฒ่าและสึกหรอไปเองนะคะแต่ถ้าเรารักษาตัวเองให้คุณค่ากับสุขภาพตัวเองเราก็ซื้อผลิตภัณฑ์อย่างโบก้ามาดื่มนะคะดูแลมันแล้วมันก็จะเจ็บปวดน้อยลงค่ะมีชีวิตที่มีสุขภาพดีขึ้นเราก็จะรักชีวิตและหงุดหงิดน้อยลงค่ะเราก็ใช้ชีวิตด้วยพลังบวกไม่เป็นภาระลูกหลานในวัยชรา
Every wheel of Dutch cheese starts in a vat filled with millions of tiny curds.
But I'm just checking if the curd is a bit equally divided.
The Netherlands produces nearly 1 billion kilos of cheese a year. More than half of it is Gouda, or Gouda, as it's pronounced here. Frank Kaptein is a 7th-generation dairy farmer. While most cheese is made in big factories with pasteurized milk, he makes a rare kind of Gouda, using raw milk. But now, farmers fear their cheesy tradition could be at risk. The Netherlands could close hundreds of dairy farms to curb nitrogen emissions. In 2017, the tiny country emitted more per hectare than any other European nation. And about half of it comes from agriculture. Especially animals pee and poop.
Cows are not potty trained, so they poop everywhere.
These emissions threaten native forests and wildlife. But critics say the country's emissions cuts unfairly target livestock farmers.
En dan zie je dat er toch wel een gevoel van onmacht is op het erf, hè, aan de keukentafel van ja, wat kan ik doen?
So how did Dutch farmers get stuck in a decades-old climate policy? And what does this mean for the rest of the world? Frank's family has been making cheese in the town of Zoeterwoude for over 150 years. Every day, he starts by warming over 600 gallons of milk, pumped in from the milking barn.
Milk floating in now is like 37 degrees, just the body temperature of a cow.
For every batch of cheese, he adds rennet, enzymes that make the proteins in the milk clump together into solid curds, leaving behind the liquid whey.
Rennet is like a pair of scissors cutting through the milk.
After 30 minutes, a giant curd has formed.
It should break open like that. That's good.
This machine starts cutting it into pieces.
And we cut it real small in order to have very little moisture in the cheese, in order to make a cheese which can age for years.
Frank's parents taught him how to make cheese when he was 22 years old.
My brother and I are the 7th generation Kaptein producing cheese and milking cows. And well, there will be at least 7 generations of cows walking on this farm as well.
He took over the family business with his brother in January of 2022.
I think 50% of the Dutch people has a great-grandfather who's been a farmer. Farmers shaped the landscape in the Netherlands.
In the 13th century, nearly a fifth of what is now the Netherlands was underwater. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to hold back the sea. Farmers drained large portions of the reclaimed land to plant crops. But one of the only things that would grow on the wet soil was grass. So raising cattle for meat, milk, and cheese became big business. The dairy industry eventually became a symbol of the Netherlands, as much as tulips and windmills. Milk and cows graced Dutch masterpieces by Vermeer and Van Gogh. By the 20th century, the Netherlands was producing so much cheese, it was a valuable export. Today, almost all Dutch dairy farms sell their milk to big factories that pasteurize it and use machines to make cheese on a large scale. But Frank only works with raw milk. Just 4% of Dutch dairy farms make Gouda in-house like he does.
We still produce it on the way like my great-grandfather did. And I don't know if it's extra good, but I like it.
And what machines do at factories, he still prefers doing by hand, like checking the consistency of the curds himself.
No, it's just warm way. It's like almost 30 degrees. And the curd is real soft now. And now all the curd over here is just like this deep under the way, and over there there's no curd anymore. But I'm just checking if the curd is a bit equally divided, equally spread.
He can start draining out some of that liquid whey, but nothing goes to waste. He skims the fat to make butter and feeds the whey to his pigs.
The pigs are already happy with just whey. And I like butter on my sandwich in the morning.
He slices the leftover curd into sections large enough for a wheel of cheese. He gauges the right amount by feel. Meanwhile, Frank's employee Savannah prepares the old buckets, most of which were Frank's grandfather's.
There are only a handful of farmers in the Netherlands who still use wooden buckets.
Frank drifts a cloth below the surface and piles the curds on top. The cloth will help the last bit of whey drain out. They repeat the process for 12 wheels of cheese.
There's a lot of whey in, so I think about 25-30 kilograms, something like that. And it's cozy.
These presses squeeze out the remaining liquid. All this cheese comes from the milk of Frank's 200 female cows. The Netherlands has nearly 1.6 million of them, and they produce lots of nitrogen because of what they eat: fertilizer-grown grass in the summer and imported grain and soy year-round. Their pee is full of nitrogen too, and when it mixes with their poop, it creates a gas called ammonia. The plumes of ammonia drop down onto nature reserves and acidify the soil. Some nitrogen-loving plants like grass take over, while other native plants can't absorb proper nutrients. From there, it's a domino effect. Many native plants grow weak or die out. Snails can't get enough nutrients to build their shells. The birds that eat the snails can't develop eggs, or their chicks are born with frail bones. Inside one of the Netherlands' largest national parks, rangers like Annemieke Visser-Winterink say oak and pine trees are dying out.
They're all sick. There's not one that I would say, oh, you know, that's very, very fit or very a healthy tree. You can say that the trees are starving. It's not getting all the nutrients that it needs to be a very healthy, full-grown oak tree that it can be.
Environmentalists say 14 habitats in the country are on the brink of collapse.
The dairy sector is one of the drivers of biodiversity loss in the Netherlands.
Back in 1992, what is now the European Union adopted a law known as the Habitats Directive, requiring countries to designate nature areas for conservation. In order to comply, the Netherlands introduced policies to cut nitrogen on these protected lands. Back then, Dutch farms had one of the highest ammonia emission rates in Europe. By 2019, the industry had cut its emissions by almost 2/3. Covered manure storage, like below this slatted floor, has helped. If it stays sealed underground for enough time, the ammonia won't evaporate as much.
Everywhere we were standing, there's 2 meters deep basement full of manure and pee.
But these efforts alone weren't enough. The farms releasing the most ammonia sat near those protected nature reserves. The nation's highest court said the Netherlands needed to do more. The government scrambled to comply. Some lawmakers suggested cutting the number of animals in the country in half. Farmers were outraged. They protested for weeks, dumping manure on streets and blocking roads with tractors.
Het is voor ons bestaansrecht.
Ik hoop dat voor te zetten, maar dan moeten de regels wel mee gaan werken, anders zal dat niet mogelijk zijn.
By early 2023, the government lowered the goal to a 50% cut. But by then, a pro-farmer political party named the Farmer Citizen Movement had swept provincial elections. Rick Lueders is a party leader in this area.
We have a nitrogen law which is rigid and is fully focused on dairy farming, and we want that this law is gone.
Soon after, the government announced a $1.6 billion plan to buy out and close up to 3,000 high-emitting farms near nature reserves. A farmer can voluntarily take the buyout and possibly get more than their farm is worth. But for Frank, selling his 7-generation farm isn't an option. He says his cows are like family.
This is Gina. She's the highest ranking, and she's the leader of the herd. She just bosses other cows away with her head, mainly. So when she wants to drink and there's another cow, boink, move aside. I'm Gina, here I am, and I want to drink.
He even got married on this farm, surrounded by his cows. And it's tradition in his family to name cows after relatives.
And I named the cow after my daughter as well.
Frank and his brother milk the cows twice a day.
First we clean the teeth, starting at left front, right rear, and left rear. And then we connect the milking claw. There's a little bit of vacuum underneath, so it sucks the milk away.
Frank gets about 8 gallons of milk a day from each cow. What he can milk in 15 minutes would have taken his grandfather an entire day. New technology helped dairy and livestock farms consolidate, beginning in the mid-20th century.
Little farmers, cheese makers, they quit. And the bigger ones, they grow bigger.
To this day, between 70 and 80% of the country's dairy is sent abroad, mainly to other European countries.
That's all in the region of between, let's say, London, Paris and Berlin, within an area of 800 kilometers. In the USA, you would call that a local product.
The Netherlands is also the EU's largest exporter of meat. It trades about $9 billion worth of pork, beef, and poultry internationally every year. And it does it all on land not much bigger than the US state of Maryland. For much of the world, the Netherlands became a roadmap for how to farm efficiently at scale. But environmentalists like Natasha Orlemans from the World Wildlife Fund see it differently.
I see the Netherlands as an example of where everything went wrong. Exporting the meat and dairy and having a huge amount of manure here in the Netherlands, causing all these environmental and societal problems.
The farmers we spoke to said saving the environment should go hand in hand with preserving their centuries-old traditions. Traditions like flipping the cheese.
In the first 24 hours of the cheese, we turn it like 6 times.
Flipping ensures both sides of the wheel will be round, like the curve of the bucket.
See it already turning yellow. So it's a good sign.
Then he moves the cheese wheels into a salty brine.
The salt bath is mainly for making a crust around the cheese. A little bit of salt will get deeper into the cheese for a little bit of taste.
Frank ages his specialty Gouda for up to 10 years at a consistent 59 degrees Fahrenheit.
This is one is from 2013, so 10 years old now. And still looking shiny, still looking young.
Here he stores hundreds of wheels, over $100,000 worth of cheese.
Every day we turn them, put an extra layer of coating on top of it.
That liquid plastic coating seals in the moisture.
And of course to keep mold away. You hear it when I lift it, it gets stuck on the shell. So that's why you flip it as well.
As it ages, friendly bacteria build up amino acids, these crystals.
That's where the flavor of the cheese comes from.
Frank can tell it's aging well from the sound.
It's nice flat here. You hear it?
Frank is one of over 45,000 people working in the Dutch dairy industry.
If you just take out half of the farmers and half of the jobs and half of the income, where do these people going to work? They go to the cities probably, and the whole villages at the countryside will become ghost cities, I think.
Within 10 or 15 years, I'm worried, who's going to produce our food? And where is it coming from?
Many farmers now face a tough decision. Take the buyout, decrease their herds, move their farms, or make pricey upgrades to try to cut nitrogen emissions. But not everyone can afford costly innovations. Many farmers are working on narrow margins or are already in debt.
Farmers don't get a loan from the bank because they say, oh, we don't know if you can still farm after this due to these regulations.
Plus, farmers don't even know yet if innovations could actually save their farm from closure. Researchers at Wageningen University are hoping they can.
This is not a commercial dairy farm. It's a research center.
That's Kees de Koning. He runs the university's dairy campus. His team is testing different iterations of the slatted floor Frank has.
We can run trials where we separate the urine and the solids.
They're also studying the effect of robotic scrapers and poop vacuums. By quickly moving waste into closed storage, vacuums reduce methane and ammonia loss. But Kees estimates one like this could cost over $20,000. And a farm of 120 cows would need 2. Kees says changing cows' diets is a cheaper option.
So, can we feed cows in such a way that we have less ammonia emission or less nitrogen losses?
His team feeds the cows different combinations of food. Then they use these troughs to test how much the animals eat and their emissions.
The electronic ID system is identified, so we know exactly which cow is in the box.
So if innovations can't help, farmers still have the option of the buyout. As of November 2023, nearly 1,000 livestock farms had registered for it. Almost a quarter were dairy farms. But the government won't pay them out for a while.
It will take at least another 6 months to a year before that is finalized.
That same month, a new right-wing party, PVV, won the most seats in the country's parliamentary elections. Geert Wilders, the party's leader, spoke at farmer protests earlier in the year.
They are killing our farmers for some idiotic leftist liberal so-called nitrogen problem in the Netherlands.
The party has signaled it wants to stop government spending on initiatives to curb nitrogen, including the fund for the buyout plan. Rick hopes the PVV will form a coalition with other pro-farmer parties.
We can make new laws. It's quite simple.
But a coalition could take months. The World Wildlife Fund says this delay will only lead to further deterioration of nature. Meanwhile, farmers are in limbo.
It's the limbo that paralyzes the agricultural sector. And that limbo is very dangerous for nature as well, because it's still suffering. It's horrible, and I can feel for them.
This problem isn't unique to the Netherlands. Dairy farmers in Ireland might have to decrease the size of their herds because of unsafe nitrogen levels in rivers, which are causing algae blooms. New Zealand has some of the most polluted waterways in the world. Dairy farming is one of the biggest sources of these dangerous nitrate levels in drinking water. And in the US state of California, agriculture has contributed to hazardous air pollution. All of these countries will have to contend with the same questions the Netherlands faces today. How do we feed ourselves, preserve tradition, keep economies running, and protect our planet?
I don't see myself as being opposing to farmers. I'm opposed to the system the way it is now. It's ecologically a disaster, and it's also not bringing farmers a proper income. So basically it's a system that's being broken, and that system needs to be fixed.
Frank seems open to a fix too.
If it helps nature or climate, bring it on.
Maybe then his family can continue making cheese for another 7 generations.
I hope that dairy farmers have a future in the Netherlands. I think we're really connected to the landscape. I hope farms won't grow too big, so it can be run on a family scale. I think that's a beautiful way of living.
Seen from miles above, these rings in the ocean look like natural coral reefs. But zoom in on high-resolution satellite images and you can make out military bases with 10,000-foot runways, ports, and gun emplacements. The South China Sea is bristling not just with artificial islands, but with egos. Here, China is facing off against the Philippines, Vietnam, and now the United States. And as the Chinese bases and fleets keep growing, and its opponents look to do the same, this is a watery battleground that looks ripe to ignite.
The chance of a small military incident that then really puts the US and China into a Cold War is very real in the South China Sea.
So will island building lead to conflict? We spoke to the director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And analysed shipping data and the rapidly changing view from above to understand how close we might be. The islands first started to appear just over 10 years ago. The Philippines, Vietnam, and to a lesser extent Malaysia have since been engaged in a race to claim, occupy, and fortify outposts in the South China Sea. But no one does it on a scale quite like China.
It's not that people are outraged because China built islands. They're outraged because China built islands with the express purpose of kicking around its smaller neighbors. So now there are Chinese planes overhead, Chinese ships on the water, 24 hours a day, everywhere in the South China Sea, made possible only by all of that island building.
The superpower has 20 outposts in the Paracel Islands and 7 in the Spratlys. Of these, 4 are fully operational air and naval bases.
They've got deep water harbors and all the harbor works that would go with them. They've got point defenses and anti-ship missiles and anti-air missiles to defend themselves. These are fully functional, and I think people don't appreciate the scale we're talking about. I mean, Subi Reef, which is just 12.5 miles from the nearest Philippine base, is roughly the size of the Pearl Harbor Naval Base of the US in Hawaii.
The Philippines occupies 9 features in the Spratlys, with just 1 airstrip. Vietnam has the most, around 50 outposts spread across 27 locations in the South China Sea, and Malaysia has 5. Now, with the region bristling with ships, firepower, and tension, Clashes are inevitable. In fact, they are happening all the time. One particular hotspot is this patch of ocean around 100 miles from the coast of the Philippines. Back in the 1990s, China occupied what was then an underwater feature called Mischief Reef. Over time, China began to build permanent structures.
The Philippines panics, and they respond by going to the next closest reef, which happened to be Second Thomas Shoal, and intentionally grounding this useless old warship that they had no other better thing to do with onto the reef as an emergency outpost to keep an eye on Mischief Reef.
That was in 1999. But if you zoom in and look closely, you can see that the old ship is still there. Today, the Sierra Madre operates as a permanent military outpost for the Philippines. Marines rotate on and off while boats coming from the mainland resupply it with food and water. Meanwhile, Mischief Reef has been transformed.
Mischief Reef is this giant ring around a lagoon. Most of Washington, D.C. could fit inside of that lagoon.
It's from here that China can launch missions to intercept and intimidate Philippine vessels, including those trying to resupply the Sierra Madre.
And so for the last 2+ years, the Philippines has had to run a blockade of China Coast Guard and Chinese militia vessels every time it wants to get through to these 8 to 10 Marines who live on this rusting hulk and are completely reliant on outside food and potable water.
This video, filmed by the Philippines military aboard the warship on June 17, 2024, shows vessels from the Chinese Coast Guard trying to stop Philippine resupply boats. Footage shows Chinese crew wielding axes and knives. These maps show the movement of Chinese Coast Guard vessels between Mischief Reef and Second Thomas Shoal in recent years. And this is the route of Chinese Coast Guard vessel 5205 in August 2024. On the 31st of August, it was filmed ramming a Philippine ship close to the disputed Sabina Shoal, east of Second Thomas Shoal.
They've gone from just getting in the way and blaring the horn to using high-pressure water cannons to both injure sailors and try to disable the engines. They've used lasers to blind crew, they've used acoustic devices to try to deafen them, and on many occasions now they've begun to just ram Philippine vessels trying to get through. And the Philippines, to its credit, has not backed down.
In accordance with international and Philippine national laws, we are proceeding according to our planned route.
The big question then is, why is China doing this, and what does it stand to gain? It's partly about control. Control of one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, of the South China Sea's valuable fish stocks, and of the reserves of oil and gas beneath the seabed.
All of that stuff is true, all of it's relevant, but none of it is why Xi Jinping cares about the South China Sea. The Chinese Communist Party has told itself a fairy tale that these things belong to China in times immemorial, and therefore they must be recovered, and we should not assume a hyper-rational China, any more than any other state is hyper-rational, any more than the fact that the US and Canada still fight over the Gulf of Maine, or that the Philippines still claims North Borneo, or that the UK didn't give up maritime claims to Rockall Island until just a few years ago. Like, states do irrational things, and China is no more rational than any other.
But no matter how irrationally China is acting in the South China Sea, it's ultimately about geography and logistics. The Spratlys are 700 miles from the Chinese ports on Hainan. Having bases this far south gives China not only a physical foothold, but a launchpad for surveillance from the air and the sea. Look closely again at Mischief Reef.
It took barely a year for Mischief Reef to go from nothing to about 1,500 acres. And then they graded and paved everything, put a 3,000 meter airstrip on it, and all kinds of infrastructure to support naval deployments, etc., as well as sensing equipment, housing, officers' quarters, defensive equipment.
China uses the runway for surveillance aircraft like KJ-200 and KJ-500, giving Beijing a permanent eye in the sky over the South China Sea.
China has eyes everywhere, and it sees everything that all the other claimants and the outside parties like the US do.
For years, the dispute has come down to who owns what, who is entitled to what. And this is where it gets messy. Although in the eyes of international law it should be fairly clear-cut. First there's the territorial sea. That's the 12 nautical miles around any piece of land which a nation owns. Beyond that is the 200 nautical mile EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone. This is the area of ocean that stretches beyond the territorial sea, and where the nation is free to exploit the natural resources, and even build artificial islands. This map shows the competing EEZs for China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and the other nations. And in the middle of it all sits the Paracels and the Spratlys, and you can see why they are so hotly contested. What you can't do is build an artificial island in someone else's EEZ and then claim your own rights around it. This is what China has done with Mischief Reef. But in 2016 an international tribunal ruled that China's claim over many features in the South China Sea, including land reclamation projects, were unlawful. And that should have been case closed.
And legally, the dispute is now over a few dozen tiny dots of territorial sea in the middle of the ocean, and everything else should be pretty clear, except that China claims a whole nother set of entitlements. China famously draws this old dotted line map that originated in the 1930s, and it says basically anything we can't find a way to claim under UNCLOS inside that line, we claim with historic rights.
The tribunal also dismissed China's so-called 9-line claim, but China rejects the court's decision and continues to patrol water and claim reefs, rocks, and islands that lie within another nation's EEZ. Vietnam, for one, has not shied away from the fight. In response to Chinese island building, the Vietnamese began building small outposts on reefs and sandbars. This map shows Vietnam's EEZ. The nation in fact claims all of the Paracel Islands and all of the Spratlys. The outposts often start as small concrete structures, like this one at Discovery Great Reef. Then from 2014 on, we start to see walkways, helipads, and small docks with deeper harbours cut into the reefs. Those are the darker areas you see here.
So all of that stuff was clearly meant to improve the resiliency of Vietnam's bases in the face of this massive Chinese buildup and this new level of coercion we saw under Xi Jinping. And then you've moved into a new phase of island building for Vietnam, which started probably about the end of 2021, but has accelerated over the last 18 months. And that's been the expansion of islands overall, where they've begun to mimic many of the tactics we saw from China, including using the same kind of dredgers.
This is Bark Canada Reef. Vietnam occupied it in 1987, and for years only had a small outpost. This is what it looks like now.
Bark Canada Reef went from being basically 0 acres of land to now the fourth largest island in the Spratlys, behind only China's Big Three. If Vietnam wants to protect what it has and protect its rights in its own waters, it needs to be able to patrol those waters in similar numbers to China. And it can't do that if Chinese boats only have to go 10 miles and the Vietnamese boats have to go 300 miles. That's just not math that'll ever work out.
For China, it's all about the math, and there's no doubt who's winning the numbers game.
Over the course of the last 40 years, China went from having a virtually no navy, no coast guard, and almost no fishing industry, to having the world's second largest navy. Largest by number of ships, second by tonnage to the US. By far the world's largest coast guard. The world's largest shipping industry, the world's largest fishing industry, the world's largest marine science industry, right? On and on and on. And a unique component of this has become China's maritime militia.
The militia are fishing boats either fully operated or contracted by the Chinese government. Their job is to disrupt and block boats from other competing nations in the South China Sea, or simply sit idle, maintaining a highly visible Chinese presence.
To see this new thing emerge in the South China Sea where Filipino and Vietnamese patrols would go out and they'd find hundreds of Chinese boats sitting at anchor, tied up to each other, often uncrewed or crewed by a skeleton crew just sitting around playing cards and watching their phones and not doing anything.
These are the movements of Chinese vessels identified by Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative as militia vessels on the same month from 2021 to 2024. With all the heightened tension above the water, an ecological disaster has been unfolding beneath the waves. To build these islands, engineers started by using clamshell dredgers, scooping sand and coral into barges and then dumping it in a pile to create islands. Nowadays, the likes of China and Vietnam are using methods that are even more destructive: suction dredging.
The drill bit grinds up everything indiscriminately. Rock, coral, marine life, sand, and then it shoots this, organic slurry out the other end. That's what China built its islands using. And that's why it didn't just kill the reef that was covered in sand, it killed all the reef nearby too. It dug up all the coral to make that sand, and then it put huge plumes of sediment into the water that drifted around and smothered anything that had managed to escape the initial digging.
As the islands and the rival navies expand, so does the chance that skirmishes turn to battles. The US has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines and has promised to come to the aid of its old ally in the event of an attack on its military or its Coast Guard. Recent meetings between Joe Biden and his Philippine counterpart Ferdinand Marcos Jr. serve as a warning shot to China, specifically with regard to the South China Sea.
It's a numbers game. You hit people with enough water cannons, you ram their boats, eventually you are going to kill somebody.
But what Greg Poling and the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative have noticed is not that the tides have turned, but that there seems to be a greater willingness to stand up to China.
The Philippines has begun to re-patrol around Scarborough Shoal for the first time since China took it from them in 2012, and it's been not only resupplying, but building up, shoring up the Sierra Madre, despite the Chinese blockades. China has, at least so far, been unwilling to use overt military force. And I think the Southeast Asians have realized that China can't have it both ways. If they just drive straight, if they ignore all the harassment, if they're firm and committed to this, they've been able to develop new resources, resupply their people, patrol where they want, and all China's behavior has done, really, is internationalize the disputes and create exactly the kind of anti-China coalition that Beijing has always feared, more than anything else.
Your actions have threatened China's sovereignty, security, and related rights and interests. To avoid miscalculations, leave and keep far off immediately. Over.
We are proceeding according to our planned route. Request to stay clear from our passage in accordance with the collision regulation. Over.
Shrimp is the most consumed seafood in the United States. And in Louisiana, it's big business. The wild-caught crustaceans bring in about $1.3 billion for the state every year. But for the last few years, shrimpers have been hit with the perfect storm of rising fuel costs and rock-bottom prices.
That's one of the toughest jobs you could ever do. And if you're not getting your dues for it, why do it?
Producers say a flood of cheaper imported shrimp from India and Ecuador is sinking Louisiana's industry. But there's no way to feed America's skyrocketing demand without imports, which make up 90% of the shrimp the U.S. consumes. Up against these headwinds, companies up and down Louisiana's supply chain are closing up shop.
If you worked hard and you did the right thing, you could become a millionaire in the 80s and the 90s. Now you could barely make a living.
So how did the industry get this bad? And is it too late to save it? New Orleans chef Justin Kennedy insists on buying only wild shrimp caught by fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico.
We have never fried a foreign shrimp and ever served it to our customer. I'll never even look at it as an option.
He runs Parkway Bakery and Tavern, a New Orleans fixture since 1911, famous for these massive po' boys.
It's just one of those perfect little things that bring all walks of life together, and damn if it's a sandwich,
He can go through 3,000 pounds of shrimp a week.
So what this is a sink that we just have chilled water piped to, and It's just a quick thaw, thawing out our seafood. And if you look at them, they're peeled. We take that vein out because it's a cleaner shrimp. It butterflies it a little bit more to kind of hold the batter and just make it a better bite. I'm gonna scoop a heaping pile of it up. So we're gonna dust this up.
He coats them in only corn flour.
We just use the natural juices and moisture from the shrimp to pick up that flour. You lightly shake that off. 350 degrees, that's pure vegetable oil. This one right here is getting that golden brown color, right? Looking like little baby fried chicken. Watch this, you break that open. Look at that. Look at that little coating. Look at that Louisiana white meat in there. You know, you can't get no better than that.
That shrimp will eventually meet one of these giant loaves.
I think I'm almost 2 breads tall. Let's see. The French people kind of laugh at it because we call it French bread, but it's New Orleans French bread. This ain't French bread.
Justin hits the bread with some mayo, lettuce, and tomato.
And then we start dealing the shrimp.
2 handfuls?
Oh no, we put more than that. Yeah, I mean
4 handfuls?
It's a big sandwich, but you'll notice when you see this thing laid out in front of you, you'll be like, how am I going to eat all that? And then all of a sudden it's gone. So we do 1 fold, tuck these in, wrap it. We're gonna put 1 more on there. There you go. Parkway Bakery shrimp po' boy.
Where's that go now?
In my belly, baby.
About 1,000 people line up every day for these sandwiches, and Justin credits local shrimp for his award-winning recipe.
You know, I've had people try to sample me foreign. The batter won't stick on it. It's translucent when you cook it. You never see this pretty white meat. It still looks clear. It still looks like this when you cook it. But this Louisiana shrimp's true and true every time. Can't beat it.
Justin gets most of his shrimp from this factory, right up the road. Kristen Baumer is one of the few processors left in the area who only works with Gulf shrimp, just like his family has for over 130 years.
We've definitely seen a lot of processors go out of business. It's become more of a volume game because the margins are so tight.
His company processes 30 million pounds of shrimp annually.
So what we're doing is easy peeling shrimp. We're hand feeding it into a machine that splits the back of the shell, cuts the shell open, and then it allows, when you cook it, more flavor to get into the shrimp as well as making it easier to peel.
Kristen's team flash freezes all the crustaceans in this room. That's how they're able to transport the shrimp all over the country.
So they're picking shrimp for the second time to make sure they get all the defects out of it before it goes up.
This shaker separates the pieces so they won't stick together when they're frozen. Then they take a trip down this tunnel at minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
And after the shrimp hits the liquid nitrogen, it forms a crust on the shrimp, and then it moves slowly through the belt to freeze from the outside in. Don't stick your finger in unless you have a warrant that you want to burn up.
This machine portions the seafood into 5-pound bags of about 15 pieces. Each bag gets a traceability barcode.
Link it all the way back to the shrimp dock that it came from.
This processed product comes out to anywhere from $7 to $10 a pound, depending on the season.
With inflation, everything is getting more and more expensive, and running these processing plants and all this moving equipment and avoiding breakdowns takes a lot of capital.
People have been fishing and processing this shrimp in Louisiana for centuries, from Cajun fishermen to the indigenous people of the United Houma Nation. In the 1800s, shrimp was a staple food of the poor, and sellers couldn't transport it far because shrimp spoiled so easily in the Louisiana heat. That was until the mid-1800s, when several advancements brought shrimp beyond the local scene. Chinese immigrants introduced traditional drying techniques that could preserve the shrimp, and the first canning factory in New Orleans opened up in 1875. But fresh shrimp transported on ice was expensive, so it took on a reputation as a luxury item tossed into shrimp salads and perched in cocktails. By the 1950s, techniques to freeze shrimp and new refrigerated trucks sealed the deal. They allowed for seafood delivery as far away as the East Coast and Chicago. This was about the time that the shrimp imports into the US from Mexico and then India began to take off. By 1970, demand across the US had nearly tripled, and domestic shrimpers caught more to keep up, with Louisiana leading the pack. By the 90s, the state's shrimp and shellfish generated nearly $2 billion and supported 22,000 jobs. And come the turn of the century, shrimp became the most consumed seafood in America. At the same time, new tech helped farms in Asia and South America raise a lot more shrimp. In less than a decade, farming production skyrocketed nearly 200%, overtaking global catches of wild shrimp. In 2023, the U.S. imported 1.7 billion pounds, nearly as much as its population consumes. And these imports are often cheaper than wild-caught U.S. shrimp. That's because labor costs are lower in big shrimp farming countries like India and Ecuador, and their governments have subsidized these operations. In the U.S., domestic shrimp prices have dropped to compete with the low import prices. Meanwhile, shrimpers like Captain Lonnie Mayu Jr. are facing skyrocketing costs of operating a boat.
You're wasting fuel and ice if you don't catch anything.
Since the 1980s, he says a block of ice has gone from $14 to $26 today. A set of new nets more than doubled, and a gallon of gas more than tripled in price. At 82 years old, Lonnie, who goes by Knuckles, hasn't given up trawling these waters, even after 6 decades. Starting in May, he heads out to catch brown shrimp, usually around sunset.
You have to go do your homework and know where they're going to be at.
He works independently, like most of the shrimpers here.
Right about there. A little too far.
During the day, brown shrimp may bury themselves in the sediment to hide from predators. But after dark, they often come out and roam in shallow water. Knuckles and his deckhand Steve drop these nets that skim the top of the water.
We're not dragging anything on the bottom.
He positions himself against the current, so the shrimp fall right into his nets.
The shrimp are not like fish. They can't really swim that great. They take a ride on the current.
Knuckles and Steve will pick out and keep just the shrimp. Sea turtles have an escape hatch in the net, and other animals get thrown back into the sea, where some dolphins are waiting to chow down on them.
If we don't pick up in their favor often enough, they'll take and bite it out the net.
They can literally rip a 4-foot hole in it, which is going to take a lot of time to fix.
Like this one. Knuckles pulls up the net so he can sew it closed.
You're going to lose everything, you know? You're going to be working for literally nothing.
This work can be grueling. Some shrimpers have big enough vessels they can stay out for weeks at a time. Knuckles has a smaller boat, so he fishes just until morning.
But it keeps you in shape.
But even after all this work, there's a chance they could have a bad run. Tonight, most of the nets were full of catfish.
Ooh, catfish.
See your belly? They're full of shrimp.
Full of shrimp. They went in the net, ate all the shrimp. We got a pound of shrimp. It's all catfish. I'm gonna try pushing up, going a little further up in the lake or something.
Knuckles spent $45,000 buying and fixing up his boat. It was meant to be his ticket to retirement. But now he's unsure that plan will work.
You know, for me to get out the business, I gotta sell it. I got no retirement, but I can't sell a boat. Can't give it away. Nobody wants it.
And most shrimpers agree it's getting harder to justify going out.
For this boat to leave the dock, it's gonna cost me over $1,000. It's killing us. The farmers is killing us.
Right now, nobody want to do it no more because they're struggling.
Milena Cheeve has been fishing for 8 years. Like 60% of the state's shrimp boat owners, she and her husband are originally from Southeast Asia.
With our education, there's nothing else we could do besides fishermen, especially like me and my husband, like in our mid-50s.
Milena and her husband weren't able to go to college, but they hoped shrimping would help their kids do the opposite.
Not enough to pay, especially when you have 2 kids in college. You're struggling.
Dock owners are feeling the impact too.
Because if we don't bring no shrimp, they don't make no money either. You know, when the shrimp boats go out, they're going to kill the docks too.
That's a pretty shrimp.
Dean Blanchard's family has been buying and selling local shrimp for 5 generations.
I was born in a shrimp dock. When I was a baby, they used to put me in a shrimp box.
His dock, 2 hours south of New Orleans, was once one of the biggest shrimp suppliers in the country. But last year, he paid the lowest prices he ever has for the larger shrimp.
30-some years ago, they went down from $5 to $1.30.
That's because he's selling it for so little to the peeling factories.
Right now, it's the cheapest I ever seen in my life. I'm sick to my stomach. I ain't never seen nothing like this. Never in my life seen it this bad.
After 6 decades in the industry, Dean's no stranger to financial challenges. From the 2010 BP oil spill to big storms. His dock had $2 million in damages after Hurricane Ida hit in 2021.
Where you're standing right there wasn't even there after the storm. I mean, I've rebuilt this building at least 8, 9 times.
He never fixed up this part of his marina.
It brings tears to your eyes. I mean, everything you work for all your life is gone.
But imports, he says, have done even more damage.
We're directly correlated with imports. If a completely processed product is coming in for just over $4 a pound, that means our dockside prices have to be lower, the processors' prices are lower. So to be able to try to get that market share and keep it. So you're making the same amount of money that you would in 2000, but 22 years later.
Fewer boats can afford to go out, so less shrimp is landing on Dean's dock.
We're down to right under 20% of what we normally are for this time of the year.
On this day we visited in May 2023, not a single shrimp boat pulled up to unload.
It ain't gonna last too much longer like this. Thank God I'm almost 65 years old and I ain't got no kids in this business.
Dean estimates that 96% of the docks operating when he started out have since closed down.
I feel bad for the people because I know once I'm gone, they're gonna have to drive 50, 60, 70 miles to go sell their product.
Just like Knuckles, when Dean retires, he doesn't think anyone will buy the company.
Nobody can afford to take it over. The property is worth more than the business.
Louisiana still hauls in the most shrimp of any U.S. state, over 70 million pounds in 2023. But that's a small fraction, the roughly 2 billion pounds the U.S. consumes.
The American landings of shrimp cannot cover the overall consumption of shrimp.
Nearly 90% of the shrimp Americans eat is imported, and much of it is sourced using controversial practices. In 2021, an International Trade Commission analysis indicated that shrimp might be the U.S. seafood market most affected by illegal fishing. Like this boat, off the coast of Gambia. It had an illegal undersized net, and although the shrimp was labeled sustainable, 99.9% of the seafood on board were other species, like sharks and octopuses.
And a lot of time, that bycatch dies on the deck and just gets thrown back into the ocean.
But the majority of the shrimp the U.S. imports is farm-raised.
A lot of our shrimp comes from India, where there are huge environmental concerns, as well as ongoing allegations of human rights abuses and forced labor.
A 2024 Associated Press report found women in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh were peeling frozen shrimp without protective gear, which can lead to frostbite.
It's kept incredibly cold to keep bacteria from proliferating. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hold ice cubes in my hand all day while I'm also trying to do very nimble work with my fingers. One of the huge issues is that these shrimp farms are isolated. They're far out on the coast. There's not OSHA. There's no one protecting and making sure that the conditions are safe.
But they have few other options for work.
A lot of times when these aquaculture facilities are built, other economic resources in these areas disappear.
అందుకు ఫ్యాక్టరీకి వెళ్ళిపోతున్నామండి ఐసేం పడదండి మొన్న వెళ్తున్నాను వెళ్ళానండి నేను కాళ్ళ నొప్పులు కానీ నడుము నొప్పులు కానీ ఉంటాయండి నుంచొని ఉంటాం కదమ్మా తెల్లగడ్డలు
Arugula baby is still trying to pay off an $8,500 loan she took out when her son was dying of liver disease. Since he passed, she's been raising her grandchildren alone. To get to the peeling shed, she has to pay for transportation and 25 cents to a recruiter. She earns below $4 every day, $2 under the country's minimum wage.
A lot of times we will see a woman being threatened for her own safety or her family's safety unless she works, unless she meets certain quotas.
Beyond the human cost, there's also an environmental one. In India, most of the farms are along coastlines, where water is plentiful and mangrove forests thrive.
Those mangroves go through deforestation. They're pulled out. They're blown up with dynamite. So we lose that nursery habitat for other sea creatures, and we lose our coastline protection.
When that happens, shrimp can have 10 times the carbon footprint of beef.
Next, these really big ponds are dug into the land. So the shrimp live in these ponds.
Chemicals and excrement from shrimp pens can leach out into surrounding environments. They can cause algae blooms and dead zones, disrupt ecosystems, and contaminate water. Shrimp farms around the world have been criticized for using antibiotics to treat illness in their ponds.
If you've ever ridden the subway home at rush hour, you know how it is. You're in tight, you're squeezed in tight. There's great opportunities for sickness to spread. And it's that exact same situation in these ponds, which is why antibiotic use is so incredibly high.
That overexposure can lead to antimicrobial resistant superbugs, a health concern that's estimated to have caused nearly 1.3 million deaths around the world in 2019. And some antibiotics, like nitrofurans, have been linked to liver damage and cancer. In the US and European Union, almost all of these kinds of drugs are banned.
So you could end up eating something that's illegal here.
In 2023, the US Food and Drug Administration turned away 51 shipments of shrimp because of banned antibiotics. But the organization checks just about 2% of imports.
So what happens with that other 96 to 98% of seafood that's coming in?
The major health concern here is the lack of testing of imported shrimp, the amount of banned substances that may be carried in these shrimp.
A 2017 LSU study found that 30 out of 42 samples tested from stores around Baton Rouge had antibiotics or antimicrobials.
And that's largely due to the fact that the FDA is responsible for more than 50 million imports annually. And there's just not enough work power to inspect everything coming in.
In the last year, the U.S. Department of Commerce has imposed duties on shrimp from India, Vietnam, and Ecuador. But these efforts, Louisianan shrimpers tell us, haven't been enough to help their incomes. Imported shrimp is still flooding the market. That's why locals like Kristen have been advocating for more regulation. He's a part of the Louisiana Shrimp Task Force, which works with the state government on long-term solutions.
We need country of origin labeling on restaurant menus, so at least when people buy, they're buying and making a choice.
In 2019, the Louisiana legislature passed a law requiring restaurants to disclose if their shrimp is imported. But some restaurants still passed off imported as domestic. The state's health department has handed down 2,600 violations since the law went into effect, but no restaurants were ever fined. In May 2024, the governor signed a bill for heavier fines on restaurants that mislabel seafood. If they're busted, they could be fined up to $2,000. While Justin says he'll never touch imported shrimp, He can understand why restaurants turn to it when the local stuff gets expensive.
They're looking for a good product that will get the register to ring, and so you can't blame them either.
With dock prices so low, he paid $4 a pound in 2023, almost half of what he was paying 2 years ago.
I understand that. When I get a cheap price, I know the shrimpers out there in the boats are probably getting hammered. But if it went back to $7 a pound, I'd still buy it. I just have to go up on my price.
A price he says he's lucky his customers would probably pay.
You're talking to one of the busiest po' boy shops in the city. What about the corner stores who are just living from day to day? There has to be some kind of medium. I just hope it'll work itself out. This has been little, small holes pecking away for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you know? And it's coming where, it's starting to take water. We're going down, you know, in this seafood industry.
The fact is, the U.S. eats so much shrimp that the stuff caught in the Gulf could never cover it all. So farm crustaceans will probably always fill that gap.
Got to import, because we can't supply the whole United States. But put a quota on it.
It has to come down from Washington. It has to be some work done up there with like regulating the import.
Dean wants federal assistance for shrimpers.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a farmer left in business if they had to live like we live. They're being subsidized for this. Shrimpers should be considered farmers of the sea, but we're not.
More inspections of seafood at U.S. ports and better traceability of shrimp from boat to plate would also help. But some experts say it comes down to better consumer awareness of the health benefits of wild-caught shrimp over farmed, like how the salmon industry got people to pay more for wild-caught thanks to messaging that it was more nutrient-dense.
If people would know exactly what they're buying and they know exactly what they're feeding their kids, they wouldn't mind paying a couple of cents more for a product that don't have antibiotics.
In the grocery store aisle, don't be fooled by tricky labeling, like product of USA or prepared in the USA. That could be referring to where the shrimp was last processed, not necessarily where it was caught. Flip to the back of the package and look for the phrase farm-raised or wild-caught in, followed by a country name. That should tell you where it's from.
Purchase U.S. farmed or U.S. wild-caught shrimp. In the U.S., farm shrimp are held to very strict regulations in regards to what antibiotics they can use and how much.
And when you're at a restaurant,
I always ask, where is that shrimp from? And if that restaurant can't answer that, then I don't order it. Or maybe we should just eat a little less shrimp and take it back to being a special occasion item.
Backed by consumer awareness, maybe then shrimpers can save their sinking ship.
We have to have it, and we will always have it. Parkway Bakery will always have Louisiana shrimp. I'll get on a boat my damn self, you know? This is my father-in-law and my wife right here, and we met back 6, 7 years ago in a po' boy competition, and that's how we met. I won by a hair. You know, I won in the short run. She definitely won in the long run.
You're not allowed to bring it up, though.
No, I'm not allowed to bring it up.